All right, everyone, I am going to go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Detzel, and I'm the Global Community Manager. Today, we have a special guest, Kunal Anand. He's the Chief Technology Officer here at Imperva. So certainly excited to have him talk a little bit about rules for Cloud WAF. We do have some upcoming webinars. We have one on attack analytics coming up in 2 weeks, July 30th. We also have a webinar, and this is going to be a series of webinars, but the first one is on August 5th on Introduction to API Security. And then we have a new product that has come out. I have a meeting with this product manager today about a webinar on client-side protection. And yes, I know a lot of you want a webinar around DAM. I am pushing hard to do that. So certainly excited about some of the webinars coming up. Without further ado, Kunal, do you want to take over?
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Kunal, and over there you can hear my daughter. She is eating breakfast right now. But today we're going to talk about Cloud WAF. What we're going to be doing today is talking about Cloud WAF rules. Cloud WAF rules are a really powerful way to shape application delivery, build capabilities around security, and do so much more. And what we're going to do today is walk through somewhere around 8 or so different rules that you can use. The conversation is going to be pretty technical. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through a real world application that I built, really simple one. We're going to get that app deployed to AWS. We're going to put Cloud WAF in front of it. We're going to create some rules. We're going to see how those rules are actually working. And we're just going to have a lot of fun and looking forward to seeing and responding to everyone's questions and having a great conversation today. I'm going to start actually by doing something. And this is the first time I've delivered a presentation where I've actually just deliberately said I didn't want to do any slides. And the reason for it is I wanted to try and make this relatively interactive. I'm actually showing you a real world application. We're actually going to do some coding. We're going to do not too much coding. We're doing a little bit of it. We're going to walk through the Cloud WAF rules. We'll actually talk at the very beginning about what the rules are. We'll walk through the application, walk through the architecture, and then we'll apply some of these rules. Just some context for some of you. I'm a long time veteran in application security. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I joined Imperva via the Previty acquisition in 2018. And last year was really my giant exposure to the overall Imperva product portfolio. But AppSec is near and dear to my heart. And I was really delighted when Chris and I were talking about what would be a really fun webinar for the community. And we just got to thinking, and one thing that I really wanted to do was talk about rules and talking about what we do in Cloud Web Application Firewall today, and previously known as Encapsula. And so what I'd love to do today is walk you through the rules. I'd love to walk you through what rules are, how they work. One thing that Chris mentioned is we're going to try and make this relatively interactive. So questions come up, please go ahead and ask them in the comments feature of Zoom. One thing that I absolutely appreciate is if folks are familiar with Zoom, Zoom has things like reactions. Reactions are great. And if there are things that you want to do, like if you want to do things like thumbs up or anything at all, go ahead and do any of that stuff. It just lets me know that we're on the right track and everything is okay with everybody. So let's jump in and let's start at a very high level of what rules are. So rules are effectively, and you'll see this this blurb up here, but it's basically a scripting language that we've developed at Imperva. And what it allows you to do is craft policies and craft specific behaviors that could be security related, delivery related, or sometimes things around access control. And we've got a pretty robust stack under the hood. So we're in about around 45 different data centers all over the world. We've got this global unified network. And what we've understood from customers is it's great that we've got things like policies out of the box. A lot of people want to extend the product. A lot of people want to do things with the product. And that's where rules really come from. And there's lots of different things about rules that I can get into. I'll kind of start at a very high level of what rules are. Effectively, they're predicates. And the predicates are broken down into what we call params, operators, and values. And I'll walk through the syntax guide in just a moment. And you can chain these things together. So you could design a rule that says, I only want to trigger on a specific URL and a specific IP combination. And I would say those are two very remedial primitives that we've seen over the last few years. And one thing that we've done at Imperva is that we've added more predicates over time. I think there's something like 40 to 50 some predicates that we expose today, and we'll walk through some really fun ones. So in today's presentation, we're going to be doing things like forwarding requests to different data centers based on the asset type. We're going to be doing things specifically to curb screen scrapers, maybe people that are using non-browser tools to access your information. We'll actually dive into doing things like honeypotting if we see specific people that are going to try and come by. And we'll do stuff around schedule maintenance. This is a really fun one. Sometimes you have applications that you've deployed, and maybe you want a specific scheduler that's always running that says between this hour and this hour, I always want to forward my request somewhere else. So we'll actually dive into all of these things in today's presentation. Now, again, there's lots of goodness here. I highly recommend that you check out the docs.imperva. We'll make sure that we post this afterwards. One thing I'll do right now, though, just to make this pretty interactive, I'll go ahead into the chat, and I'm just going to go in here. And so for those that want to follow along with documentation, feel free to jump in here. This is the high-level story around rules. There's a pretty robust syntax guide in terms of how rules work. And again, this kind of zooms into the story around predicates. There's lots of different operators. There's lots of caveats for building rules. We're going to walk through a lot of this stuff today. So I'm going to close this tab over here. The other cool things to share with you is over time, we've heard a lot of interesting use cases, whether it's around security or application delivery. And we've collected those. We shared that information all in our documentation. I'm going to go ahead and post these as well into the chat. So again, I'm not going to read through this stuff, but what I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share all of this information in here. So just in case you want to follow along, just in case you get inspired and you want to look at other examples of rules, you're more than welcome to. So again, there's security related cases, and we'll dive into some of them. There are delivery related cases as well. Maybe you want to do things like redirects, etc. So that's a high level, very, very high level story around rules. And again, I'm not going to walk through every single predicate. I'm not going to walk through the syntax guide or how to individually craft a specific thing for a specific predicate. Instead, what I'd like to do now is actually walk you through a demo application that I built for today. Now, one of the things that I thought would be really interesting when going into things like rules was, what if we could actually focus on a specific application? What if we could actually build a very, very simple, very primitive application that allows you to get information and post information? It doesn't need a complex stack, because ultimately it's going to live layer 7. It's going to be a simple application, and it's just designed just enough things inside of the application to start to showcase things like specific rules that I mentioned before. So I'm going to go ahead, and the dangerous part of screen sharing over here is I'm going to walk you through Visual Studio Code as an example. So over here, so I don't know how many people are familiar with the Go programming language. I love the Go programming language. I write all sorts of things in Go. It could be system tools. I tend to write even things like web applications in Go as well. And this is a really tiny web application I developed for this demo today. It's about 125 lines of code. And in Go, there's a web framework called Echo. I'm using the Echo framework. And what I've done is I've exposed several routes in the framework. So /, which is basically the root or the index handler, a place to put comments, a place to retrieve a schedule, a health check. And maybe to start at the top, this application that I built is a guest book. So I don't know how many people remember guest books from way back in the day. I guess they still exist. When I was Googling for it, I found some fun stuff. Your mileage may vary though. And so what I did was I built a webinar guest book. I thought it would be a really fun application to build, and really, really interesting application that just exposes enough so we could do things like building rules. So there's a couple of examples in here. I'll walk you through some of the handlers from a code-based perspective. And I'm doing this just to give you a sense as to how the application is crafted. Again, I'm a pretty technical person, and you'll see me try to expose some of this technology. We won't go super, super deep. We'll try and bring it back up. But for those that want to just see a little bit more about the application, that's what this part's going to be for. So there are a couple of key handlers in here. The index handler is designed to just bring up the index page. I wrote a little method called render, which is able to go and grab a template file. So this is my index.html, and you'll see that in the browser in a minute when we load the server back up locally. A comment handler is going to grab the posted comment. And one thing I wanted to do, and I thought it would be interesting, is if we could actually allow for uploads, like if we could allow for photo uploads, and then if we could weave that through. And again, pretty standard behavior for an application to allow things like that. So in this particular case, this is just a method that I wrote to go and grab a file and write it to a uploads directory over here. And a schedule handler. So again, Chris was already sharing some fun things about upcoming webinars. I just wanted to stub it out with some examples like an intro to AppSec, intro to DataSec, and then a health handler, something that you either need when you're developing either with containers where you need health checks, or if you put this in an instance where you've got a load balancer in front of it, you sometimes need those health checks, or you want a handler or a route that you can expose that's going to return things like a server 200. Really, really straightforward. And again, because this is the Go programming language, the way Go works is you actually compile this code, it generates a binary, and then you execute that binary. So I'm going to go back now to sharing my overall desktop. And again, let's go back to the terminal. Chris, just to confirm that you can see all of this.
Yeah, I can see all kinds of code and
Yep.
stuff like that. So if that's what I'm supposed to be seeing.
Yep, there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kick off this application. We're going to get it started locally. The HTTP server starts and it's going to mount on port 1323. Pretty simple. So we'll start by just looking at this application locally. So this is in my local environment, localhost port 1323. Nothing really exciting. Again, you can go and add a comment. You can go and grab comments or see a list of all the upcoming comments. And if you wanted to, you could take a look at the upcoming webinars. That's an AJAX call, an HTTPS call over here that we see in the back end. It's just going to go and fetch and write the stuff back out to the DOM. A good example that you can see of how this thing works, you can write a test. If you wanted to, you could do image upload. So let's say I wanted to, I don't know, upload something pretty straightforward, list of colors and fun names around colors. I could go ahead and do that. So again, very, very simple application, just allowing the bare minimum to post information and pull information out on the other side. Now, for this demo, what I also thought would be compelling is if we could push all of this to an AWS instance, if we could actually take this application and deploy it out to AWS so we could put Cloud WAF in front of it. And so what we ended up doing was we created an EC2 instance. So this is an EC2 instance that exists. It's built for this webinar presentation. And you can see this is a live instance running in EC2. And then we put a load balancer in front of it for webinar.impervademo.com. And you'll see that it's listening or routing traffic from port 80 to port 1323 or anything from 443 if you're using HTTPS or TLS, and forwarding back downstream to 1323 in this environment. So that's the high level setup over here. And again, I wanted to be pretty lo-fi about this, nothing too crazy, nothing too sophisticated. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through an example. So if we wanted to do a build of the binary, and then we wanted to do a deploy of that binary, what we'll do is we'll actually go and we'll grab all this metadata, we'll grab all these files, and we'll just upload this up to the server. So again, nothing crazy, nothing too out of the norm. And the deploy script just runs that go build command locally, and then copies all the files that I have locally back up to the server. In this terminal tab that you can see over here, this is where I actually have my server. And so in here to launch a Go binary, it's just this. So now my server started, and in a couple of moments, you'll see things like the load balancer health check. So because I'm sitting on an EC2 instance behind a load balancer, you'll see the load balancer come by, go through the health check, and then make sure that everything is healthy. And if everything is healthy, you'll see the application come back up. And now with that, we'll actually start diving into building some rules and showing you some rules that we can build and that we can use in this example application. So if we go back over here to webinar.impervademo.com, I refresh and you can see the first part over here is the request was blocked by the security rules. Okay, so this, I actually cheated a little bit, and I actually started by showing or creating a rule from the very beginning, one rule from the very beginning, because I didn't want everybody accessing this particular demo. I wanted to only restrict this demo to specific IP addresses. And so we actually have a rule for that. Let me go ahead, I'll stop sharing for just a second. I'm gonna log back into the portal over here, and then I'll start showing you some of these rules. So just give me 1 second to log back into the console. So this is my account. I'm going to walk over to the website section over here. I'm going to load up webinar.impervademo.com. And the webinar page over here has some rules that I've already been building out, and we're going to be walking through a lot of this stuff today. But there's one rule, only one rule that's enabled right now, and that's to block untrusted requests that we see. And those untrusted requests are restricting it to specific IP addresses. Now, again, I go back to this error message, and one thing that we'll do is we'll surface out our specific IP address where we're coming from. And one cool thing about the syntax is you can have lists. You don't actually have to do client IP equals this, or client IP equals this, or client IP equals that. It gets a little tedious when you've got a lot of different addresses that you want to use. And so this is the interface for going in and building and editing a rule. Just to sort of back up, we've got a drop down where you can go and pick rules. In this particular case, I kind of know what I'm looking for over here because it's a restriction around client IPs. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and take my IP address, and I'm just going to go and add it to this list. And over here, there's some rule actions. So what we want to do when we see a match of the predicates or predicate above. And in this particular case, I want to go ahead and block the request. There's lots of different things you can do, and we'll actually walk through those things later today. And in this case, we just want to say block untrusted requests. And what we're doing right now, and when I save that rule, what's actually happening under the hood is, what Imperva does is we save the rule, we'll validate the rule, we'll make sure that rule is okay. We'll actually go ahead and do an optimization of that rule. And then we'll propagate that rule out to all of the different data centers that we have. So again, we've got 45 different points of presence all over the world. And what's happening right now is that rule is propagating out. Sometimes it could take up to a minute or so for that rule to really propagate out to all the different edge nodes that we've got deployed all over the world. So if we go back now over to webinar over here, let's make sure that the application's up and running, and sure enough, it is. So again, we're now out of localhost, and we're now running in production, so webinar.impervademo.com. And let's just verify that the application is working as expected, so we can go ahead and do a test, and there we go. So the application is working, and now we have an active thing in production, and everything seems to be going pretty well. Now comes the fun stuff. There's lots of ways that this application could be broken. There's lots of ways this particular application could be defeated. Again, you could probably already start to see, and maybe some of you that are security inclined were like, I don't know about about some of these things, specifically around uploading images. Well, you'd be right. I mean, we don't, maybe from like a development and operations perspective, we never really want large files ever being posted back up to us. Maybe we want to find a way to prevent that from even happening. You know, problem with large uploads is that you can tie up your application server. You can hog very important resources on the application server side. So one thing that some of you may or may not know about me is I love photography. And one thing I love to do is, again, in my role, I get to travel all over the world, and I get to take photos everywhere I go. And I've got these large photos that I've taken from places. So there's a 4.6 megabyte photo over here. Let's go ahead and let's go and do an upload of that. And so you can see the browser down there is going to do an upload. It's going to refresh. And I was able to go ahead just now and do an upload of 4 megs. But what if we want to restrict it? What if we don't want a 4 megabyte photo ever coming up? Maybe we want to just make things a lot more efficient before things ever make it back up to us. So that takes us to our second rule of the day. And I built this out already, and I built a lot of these rules out to save a lot of time in the presentation and really give you the narrative. But again, 2 interesting predicates that we have are really around post size and request size, at least when it comes from a filter perspective. So we could build a predicate that is saying that I never want to allow a post size, or I want to match when I see a post size rather, that's greater than 2 megabytes. And you'll see that this is in binary. This is not in decimal. If this was decimal, it'd be 2 million. But this is binary. So what we're doing is expressing it out in binary form. So if I'm seeing a post size or a request size, and again, this is going to do a match on the number in bytes, not in megabytes, not in kilobytes, but in actual number of bytes. So if I see something that's greater than this in number of bytes, I want to go ahead and block the request. And then we'll give it a rule name of block large file uploads. We'll go down and we'll enable the rule. And again, it'll take up to a minute or so for this rule to propagate through the network. And we'll go back in and we'll test it. But what we're doing right now is we're going in and we're saying, if it's over a certain size, maybe I want to go ahead and block. And while this propagates, one thing that I can show you as an alternative that you could do is, maybe you don't necessarily want to block the request. Maybe you want to prompt with another security event. Maybe you want to do something like serve up a CAPTCHA. Maybe you want to do something like flag or do an alert under the hood. Or maybe you want to do a redirect somewhere else. Again, we give organizations a lot of power and a lot of flexibility in terms of what they really want to do with these large, or really from not large files, what I was going to say, but you have really customizable actions in terms of what you want to do. So let's go back now to the webinar guest book. Let's refresh and make sure that everything is still working as expected. And sure enough, it is. And if we go back in here and we'll do another test. So we did the 4 megabyte one. Now let's try the this. Let's actually start with the small one. Let's make sure that the rule is working as expected. I have no idea what these images are. There's some fun memes that I've collected over the last few weeks or months. And over here, when the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. When a file you don't need exceeds 50 megabytes, git ignore. So developer humor, I guess.
That's what I was about to say. It must be a developer thing.
Yeah, sorry. So this is going to be somewhat technical. And so let's go ahead now and let's try and apply the 7 megabyte file over here. And again, hopefully the rule's propagated out by this point. And if it hasn't, we'll just go through the process one more time. And you can see we're going through an upload, and you'll see the upload stalled. The uploading 2% that you see at the bottom of the screen down there has stalled. Because what we've done is on the Cloud WAF side is we've understood that this is a large file that's coming through the wire, and we're actually stopping it. We're preventing it. We're going to block, and there you go. We blocked it based on a security rule. So we were able to go ahead and we were able to trigger that this is something that we should not allow. This is not something that we actually want to happen and come through the other side. So again, you'll see that file upload that we were expecting to see just didn't happen. We prevented it. So your application servers are safe. Your application servers didn't even get to see this heavy thing that came through the other side. We took care of it. We filtered it out for you. And I think that's a really important thing from an operations and a development perspective, is if you are allowing these large files, if you're allowing these things, today you can limit these things on your application servers. But if you leverage things like Cloud WAF, let us handle it for you. Let us take care of it for you so you don't waste those precious resources downstream. So that's the first rule, or the second rule rather, that I wanted to get into today. Now, the next one is really around abuse that we could see. What if someone is trying to post really frequently and they want to add comments as fast as they possibly can? And this takes us to the third rule that we want to build, or really it's a series of rules rather, around custom counters. And so we'll start.
Hey, Kunal.
Yep.
Just a quick comment. Somebody just sent me a private message and said, hey, these rules things are very good because I've never really done rules in Imperva. So just thought I'd give that feedback right off.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And one thing we'll do is, again, this is being recorded. We'll make sure all this stuff is shared out. And Chris, one thing I can do is I can push this application if folks would find it helpful. Let me know in the chat if you find it helpful. But one thing we could do is I can share all of these. I can actually go and take the demo application, put it up into a GitHub repository, and then also share all of these rules. Would folks, maybe for those in the chat right now, those that are active, would you find that helpful if I went ahead and did that? Yay, nay? Okay.
Yes, please.
Cool.
Yes.
Awesome. So, I see the chat. Awesome. Sounds good.
I'm getting some private messages too, so sorry.
No problem. Yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll take care of it. So we'll make sure that we get all of these things posted. So really appreciate the feedback, everybody, and let's keep going. So the next thing that we've heard from people is, I'm really worried about volumetric attacks. I'm really worried about people that may be abusing the business logic in my application. And maybe we want to build a rule that says, I don't want someone to comment more than once in a 60-second window rather. So it's actually a series of 2 rules. And this is going to show you now the real power of the rule-based system. I already built what we call a custom rate. And what I mean by that is we have an ability to build a rate based on a filter. And one filter that I've already built is, let's say I see a request to /comment, and it's a post request. Okay, so we're saying when someone is posting a comment, and again, it could be text, could be images, the action down here isn't actually a block, but the action down here is a count. And again, count is something that we exposed relatively recently. It's all the way down here at the bottom underneath security. And we give you different ways that you can group. You can count based off of activity of an IP. You can count based off of activity in a session. I'm going to count off of an IP address. And I want to build a rule that says, I want to start looking when I see activity that's coming in for /comment with a post request, and I want to start tracking the count of those IP addresses as they're accessing that information. So that's rule number one as part of this whole thing, which is I want to start counting. Now you can do a block if you wanted to on that. And this is where you now can go ahead and build a security rule. And in this particular case, I'm going to go back to a rule that I've already built, and we expose a predicate, or we expose a filter up here called custom rate. And again, you can see it over in this thing. So you can go into custom rate, and we already pre-populate it with the one rate that we've already developed. And if we wanted to, we could build a count over a particular size. So in this particular case, I'm saying I want to leverage this custom rate, and I want to do a threshold of 1, which is I want to limit this to 1 IP address per minute posting a comment. And anything over that, I want to go ahead and block. So we'll go over here and we'll enable that rule as well. So this is going to propagate out. Yep. What's up, Chris?
Quick question. Is there a way to set up shared rules that can be enabled for multiple sites without having to create separate rules that do the same thing for multiple websites?
Yeah, so my understanding is that there is a way to do it via policies, so that there's a way from the new policy management capability that we just released. I believe it's something that can be applied. However, I don't know if this applies in all the way to rules. So I'll double check with you guys and let you know if this is something that we can apply from the rules page to everything else. But I do know that from a policy perspective, you can accomplish many of these things from there, and policies do cascade on an asset level. So you can do it at a high level organization and then apply it to sub accounts, or you can apply it to separate websites. But it's a good question. I don't know if all of what I'm showing you can be applied as part of the policy management. So Chris, let's take it as an action item. Let's post this as something to follow back on. So I see in the chat, we got Sean and we got Jared asking these questions. So let's go ahead and let's circle back and share it back with everybody once we figure it out.
Will do.
All right. So hopefully this rule is now propagated, and we are now doing this custom rate blocking for specific IPs for the specific rule that's coming up. So we're going to go and refresh. And again, I'm just going to pick my name and do a test over here. I'll do a submit. So all the way down here, you can see my most recent thing. And if I go back in a short window and I do a test 2, I do a submit, we were blocked. And we were blocked by specific security rules. And now sometimes a question that we always hear from people is, what security rule did you actually block on? As we start to add more rules, people always end up asking a question, what is this actually doing under the hood? So there's a dashboard section that we have for your specific website. And there's actually a real-time dashboard. It takes a second for the real-time dashboard to hydrate. But what the real-time dashboard will do is it'll go ahead and grab things off the wire. And you can see that we did a block of a specific in-cap rule. And if you wanted to, you could click more into it and see exactly which rule it was that we triggered on. And in this case, we did a block on comment rate over 1. So this is a great example of how you can generate a custom rate for an activity. So it could be a GET request, could be a POST request, anything related to business logic for your application. And then you could build constraints around that. And then post constraints, you can choose what you want to do, if you want to block or you want to do something else. And again, you can maybe not want to block, maybe you want to serve up a CAPTCHA or whatever you want. But that's just kind of the flexibility of how you can chain some of these rules together. I'll be honest, my mind was blown when I saw this. Getting exposed to Cloud WAF and then seeing the power of the rules system and then seeing the power of combining these rules together blew my mind in terms of opening up the sort of possibilities that I think a lot of organizations could end up using or doing inside of their environment. All right, so that was a high level of what we showed on the custom rate side over here. What I'd like to get to now is another thing, which is going to take us to potential coding or some possible coding. One thing that we have at the edge is a lot of information about where people are coming from. So there's this understanding of like lat, long, specific geo information, a lot of metadata that we have with the request. We do things like device classification, client classification, and oftentimes we get asked from organizations, I want to see this information come up in my environment. Can you send this metadata? Can you send this information downstream? So we call it header enrichment. And one thing that we have is things like countries. So I thought it would be kind of fun in our guest book if we could actually keep track of the countries that are being that are people are commenting from, and if we could save those countries and copy that, or basically put that into the comment wall that you see over here. And so for that, what I want to do is I want to go actually back to my local host environment. I'm just going to refresh the servers off, and let me go ahead and share my entire screen with you all here.
Real quick, which is processed first, a blacklisted IP or a rule that was created to block an IP? Is one method more efficient than the other?
That's a really good question. My understanding is that the ACL is processed first and then the rule, but I think with some of the most recent changes that we've made under the hood, I think they're about the same now in terms of efficacy and performance. I think they all funnel back down to the same thing at this point, but we can double check on that, Chris.
Will do.
So let's go back to the comment handler over here. Let's say I want to send a header down, and the header being XIMPV country. Okay, let's say we're going to collect this information, and so before we were not we were just sending in a blank string for country, and maybe now I want to go ahead and surface the country information in the template. So if a country is passed in, maybe I want to surface it and say something like Kunal from US or from any other country, IN, whatever, it said the comment itself. So in this particular case, all I'm doing is I'm now grabbing a header value and I'm pushing that header value down to the page. That's really it. And so I'm going to go back to my terminal over here locally. I'm just going to kill the production server, and I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm going to just do a bash build. So we just want to rebuild the binary because we just made one logical change, which is to go and grab the header. And I'm going to do a deploy back into the server. And we're going to just copy that new binary back up to the production environment, as well as the static asset. And the static asset in this case being the index.html. Of course, you'll see a lot of other things come for the ride up there as well. Now, that's us doing the push to production. And we're just going to go ahead and bounce the server over here. We'll wait for the health checks to come by from the Elastic Load Balancer. You'll see those pings come in. I think we set the threshold to about 5 seconds or 5 checks or so. So before the load balancer re-registers the instance and pulls it back in publicly. But I'll go back in and I will just jump over to the webinar page over here. You'll see we cleared out everything. We bounced the server, pretty straightforward. And now let's go back over to the rules page. And let's build an enrichment rule. And we already have one, and this is a really fun rule over here. You'll see that we're actually not matching on any specific filter. What we want to say is, I always want to pass this country information down to the application all the time. And in this particular case, we can use what we call our rewrite request header, which is going to be creating a header or modifying a header. And in this case, I want to create the header XIMPV country. And this is a really important checkbox. I think sometimes people miss this, which is add it if it is missing. So sometimes the header may be there. So things like you're forwarded for from your upstream balancer, if you have something like that, or if you've got some sort of other device that's doing header enrichment, could be some sort of gateway. You sometimes forget that sometimes that may not be there, and you want to probably create it. So downstream, you may have applications or clients that may depend on that header. And in this case, we're just going to say if it's not already there, let's rewrite it. And we're going to discard what was there before, and we're going to use what we have as a reserved variable for $.country. So there are reserved variables over here on this side. There's more of these. You can find this in our documentation. But in this case, I just want to say I want to grab the country information and put that into the header value over here. I'm just going to go down, enable the rule, let that propagate, and I'll head back in just really quickly back into that rule for a second. And while I'm at it, let me just go ahead and disable the block on comment rate because I think we're going to experiment a little bit more in a little bit with some other kinds of rules. So let's just go ahead. And that was a quick shortcut, by the way. You can use the hamburger menu over here or the 3 little dots on the right-hand side to just quickly go ahead and enable and disable specific rules. So I can go ahead if I wanted to really quickly and disable rules. And again, sometimes it's helpful to do this enabling and disabling of rules if you just want to just isolate exactly what one specific rule is going to do. Again, you can use the real-time dashboard to really look and see what you did trigger on in this case. But this is a really good way to just start I would say isolating them. I think for a webinar like this, which is relatively instructive, I think it makes sense to disable some of these rules as we're building them in progress. So let's go ahead, let's refresh, and we'll just do a quick test to see if we're now collecting the country information and sending it downstream. We'll hit submit, and sure enough, Kunal from US said. And again, this is now us collecting all this information. I don't have a proxy, and I'm not going to start switching to a proxy, otherwise I'll terminate the Zoom connection that we have over here. This is a really good example of using header enrichment to collect information downstream. And again, there's lots of things that you can modify. So again, you may have another gateway or another appliance upstream, and maybe you want to manipulate those headers and make sure those headers pass down. This is one way where you can do that. And of course, you can send additional information back down as well. So yep.
Quick question, is there a way to block SQL injection at Imperva for Java-based applications?
Yeah, so actually by default, we already, the wonderful thing about the single stack solution that we have is we already automatically look for injection attempts. So we look for injections like cross-site scripting, SQL injection. You actually don't have to build a rule for that. We'll look for that automatically, and we'll protect applications downstream that could be .NET, Java. Really, it's agnostic. So we have a pretty robust threat research team, 30 plus people or so, and the research team that have really built up policies, signatures, definitions around stuff like SQL injection. So the good news is for all of you, again, the best part is you don't have to build specific rules around SQL injection. We handle all that stuff for you on the back end.
One other question for you. Can we pass a client IP value in the header rewrite?
Oh yeah, you can pass along you can pass down the X forwarded for information over here. If you were to head back into this rule, there could be things like the original IP address that comes in. There could be things that you may want to pass down. Again, there's some reserve that we have over here. But if you wanted to, let's say you had things like the X forwarded for, it could be from anything else, you could do that. And you would just put the header name in here, and you would just have to make sure that it is being passed down, and that's it. So just adding new if missing. You don't have to set it to anything unless you want to leverage maybe an IP address that we're already collecting, but you could just pass in something that you already have from an upstream device and pass it all the way through.
Great, and the questions keep coming in, so if you don't mind, can I ask you another question?
Yeah, sounds good.
If we have configured cache on the WAF, deploying new rules, are they applied immediately? So usually comments are configured on static pages, and hence we do add cache on static pages. Adding rules, will it be applied immediately? Like limit the number of comments? Thanks.
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. Yeah, and I don't know the order of operations on that. So let's put a pin in that and let's make sure we come back to it. In my demo application, I didn't actually test with CDN or with caching enabled, but that's a really good point. And Chris, I mean, one thing that maybe what we can do is, it sounds like people really like this. We can do a part 2 to this, and we can go way deep into that because that's a really good idea, which is how we can combine things like from our CDN and whatnot as well into the mix. But you'll see, actually, I'll actually dive into some CDNs, quasi CDN stuff with data centers in just a moment. But I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer that question. We'll do our best to answer that, and we'll get back to you. We'll reach out to the PM and PD team and get that. All right, now really fast. I know we're getting closer to the end here. There are a few rules that I wanted to show off. One is, remember this upcoming webinars thing that we were looking at before. This is coming off of a schedule. This is coming off of an AJAX call that we see in the back end. And if I just bring up the inspector over here, you can see the network request that we're making to the back end. So /schedule is pulling out this response data on the other side. So it's just serialized HTML that we're sending back down. Now, one thing that I can do from my console over here is I can do a curl on that. So I can actually do a curl for webinar.impervademo.com/schedule. And in this case, I'm able to go ahead and pull this information out. Now, what if you actually wanted to block on the client type? What if you actually wanted to say, I never want curl coming by, but it's okay for a web browser to access the schedule, but I just don't want curl accessing this thing. So again, some powerful stuff that we have under the hood. We do device classification, client classification. And if you wanted to, you could build a web browser not a web browser. You could build a rule. And in this particular case, I have pre-generated one that uses the client type filter. And the client type filter specifically is going to say, or in my specific rule, if I'm not a browser, and there's actually all sorts of robust things that we have out of the box. So if it's a particular kind of bot, if it's a hacking tool, if it's you name it, we have it, including vulnerability scanners. So we have some definitions for that. The vulnerability scanners are pretty interesting because sometimes you may be in a situation, I'll just go ahead and enable that in the background. You may be in a situation where you are using things like a dynamic scanner against your applications and you want that to go through. You actually don't want your WAF to block on it. You want that behavior to happen. So you can now take vulnerability backlogs back to your dev teams and tell them you've got some issues over here. This is a great way where you can allow that. And this is the kind of sort of flexibility that we can give you. Again, you can chain it with other things. So I can chain it with a URL if I wanted to. And sorry if I'm speaking a little bit faster. I'm just trying to pick up the pace a little bit over here. So if we now go back to webinar.impervademo.com/schedule, you'll see we blocked that HTML over here. And if we now jump back over to the web browser, let's just refresh the page and make sure that we can access this over here from the browser. And sure enough, we can. It's just that my curl call locally isn't working. And so we think that this is a really compelling thing. Now, where it gets really fun, and I'm gonna disable that rule that I just enabled. Where it gets really, really fun is if you want to start to do things like honeypotting. Maybe I want to surface fake information. Maybe I don't want to show that block. Maybe I actually want to show fake information over here. And for that, I figured what we could do is go back to our local hosted environment. So I just disabled that rule. And again, the only rules that we have now are things like large file uploads, my specific IP address. We'll still do the country enrichment, and that's specifically around rewriting the request. But what if we want to do things like honeypotting? What if we want to honeypot those people that are coming in and surface fake data versus actually just blocking the request? So for that, let's go back to localhost. I'm going to go back to my screen over here. And what we want to do is let's set a fake route. Let's call it fake schedule. And let's make a new handler, fake schedule handler. So sorry, Chris, this is totally going to be fake stuff. Don't want to salt the work that you're doing here. So intro to nothing, intro to something, never first and always first, right? So really straightforward. We didn't make any changes to the front end. We're just making a change to the back end over here. I'm going to go back really quickly. And I'm just going to do a go run, make sure that the application is behaving as expected. Sure enough, it is. Sure enough, we can refresh stuff. But if someone were to go and now hit fake schedule on the back end, we're turning back fake data. So nothing and always that you see over here. So let's go ahead. Let's quickly go and get our server restarted. Let's go in. Let's rebuild the binary that we have over here. And now let's just do a deploy. Let's get that binary back out to production. And so again, we just made a quick change to the application. One thing that you can do is this could be a static resource. This could be in a resource in maybe a different data center. One technique that we have seen is people sometimes spin up a separate data center that may just be a pool of servers or just one server that's got a honeypot of just fake information. It could be on the static resources side. Again, there's lots of ways that you could do this. You could do rewriting of requests, and that's what we're going to do in this particular case. So the load balancer is going to come by. While that's going on, I'm going to head back over here, and I've already pre-generated this rule. So it's sending people to the fake schedule. So in this case, if my client is not a browser, the request is going to be schedule. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite the request URL. I'm going to send it down to /fake schedule. I'm going to go ahead here and enable the rule. And again, there's lots of things that you could do. As I mentioned before, it doesn't have to be to a route that you have inside of your application. One thing that you'll see in a little bit, and one thing really excited to share with you, is what you can do around forwarding these particular requests. Maybe you want to forward specific assets somewhere else, and maybe that asset that you want to pull from, maybe /schedule, could be in a different DC, could be maybe in an S3 bucket somewhere that you want to load that data from over here. So let's go back now in the production environment. Let's make sure that the application is up and running and that we can retrieve things. The rule could still be propagating, but let's go in now and let's kick off the curl request. So if we now do a curl, so this is for webinar.impervademo.com /schedule. You'll see intro to nothing, intro to something. So in this case, what we were able to do is we're able to say, if I see a non-browser coming to the schedule page, don't block the request, serve up fake data. And for folks that are in e-commerce, folks that are in banking, folks that have maybe sensitive things that they're posting that maybe you're worried about things like scraping or people coming by to get access to that information. This is a really powerful technique. It's deception, right? And again, this is a very crude example that I'm applying here in this environment. There's obviously a lot more cooler things that you can do with this capability. I have two more that I want to show you, so we're going to go at a little bit of a faster rate, if that's all right. The next one I want to show you is specifically around how we can forward requests to specific data centers. So with that, one thing that I ended up doing was, and you can see this is an image resource for Imperva, the Imperva logo. I spun up an S3 bucket. And in the S3 bucket, I followed the same routes, the same URLs, and I have a different version of the logo over here. And the different version of the logo just says served from AWS S3. Sometimes you may want to route things, maybe based on a specific URL, a specific asset type, to a different place, to a different data center. And so what we have over here inside of the console is the ability to create data centers. And before I do that, let me just quickly enable these rules. I know we're pressed a little bit for time, but let me enable this rule, and I promise I'll walk you through how this rule actually works. I actually have to enable two rules, and I'll walk you through why we have to do that in just a moment. So let me go ahead and let me go back in and enable this rule, just so it propagates in time. But let me go ahead and walk you through a setting that we set up for this application. Some people know, or maybe you don't, there's lots of different ways that you can use and leverage origin servers as part of your setup. Sometimes you may have a single setup, sometimes you may have multiple data centers. And in this particular case, I set up multiple data centers. This is the CNAME of my server, specifically the CNAME of the load balancer, where we have the instance behind. And up here, we've got a CNAME that we have for my S3 bucket. And I've just gone ahead, I've created it. And now when I go back to rules, when you create these data centers, you can actually do a couple of cool things. Now, one thing to share is, because I'm leveraging S3, S3 doesn't share things over HTTPS. S3 serves things only over HTTP. So for that, I ended up building a rule that said if I see anything coming over HTTPS, modify it to HTTP. There are other workarounds for this in terms of request rewriting. Just for expediency and for the purpose of the demo over here, I'm just going through this particular path. And that particular rule is really straightforward. There, again, is a filter that is looking for if the protocol is something like HTTP or HTTPS. And in this case, if I see something that is HTTPS, I'm going to do a redirect, and I'm going to do a redirect to the root of HTTP over here. And then the other thing that I built is a forward. And so there's a different kind of rule that you can build, not a security rule, but a forward rule. And in this particular case, what I'm saying is if the request coming in is matching this particular URI, forward it to a data center. And in this case, we pre-populated it with S3. So again, if you set up your data centers and if you've got matching routes, we will actually go ahead and pull an asset from over there. And that's just doing a rewrite under the hood. So we've already enabled this rule. I'm going to go back in and hopefully this is propagated. I may need to clear my cache, and there it is. So there you have it. In this particular case, we're now serving just that one resource out of S3 and in this particular case. So we think that this is a really powerful thing as well, because sometimes you may want to go ahead and fetch assets from other places. You could use this in conjunction with the honeypot example that I was showing before, where maybe you want to pull fake information, maybe static information or static pricing information from somewhere. This may be a really cool technique that you could apply. The last rule, and I think this is a really cool one, and really cool one, especially if you are DevOps minded or you're working with DevOps teams and maybe you deploy changes to your production environment a certain time of day, a certain day of the week, certain month of the week, etc. What I ended up doing over here back in the S3 bucket is I created an index page, which is a under maintenance page. Very simple, very simple page. Sorry, we're under maintenance right now. Check back again in a bit, right? Simple page. Sometimes you're deploying things to your production environment. Maybe you're bouncing servers, but maybe that timing is pretty predictable. Maybe the time of when you actually deploy to production is fairly predictable over here. So what I ended up doing is leveraging what we recently released, and it's our scheduler. It's a specific rule that we built, and or a filter that we built. Sorry, it's a parameter that we built, and the schedule parameter allows you to trigger on certain times of day, and you could go off of intervals. You could do it off of every Monday of the week, month, day, hour, minute, you name it. And so this is really good if you've got automation in your environment where you're deploying or making changes to your production environment on a known schedule, on a known cadence. And in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and also leverage a forward rule. And I'm going to go in, I'll just enable the rule really quickly, and then we'll go in and we'll take a look at what the rule is actually doing. But in this case, I've got a rule that says, is it's going to leverage the scheduler, and it's going to say on the 16th of the month, which is what today is, I'm going to take an action, and the action is going to be to forward to data center and forward to S3. So again, you saw before how we can forward a request, and we can forward based on an individual asset. In this case, I'm going to forward the root of the domain over to the S3 bucket. And this rule is already enabled in this environment. And if we go back over here, again, it may take a couple of minutes or a minute up to a minute to propagate it over here. Sure enough, you now refresh, and sorry, we're under maintenance right now. Check back again in a bit. So there you have it, leveraging the scheduler. And if you wanted to, you could disable the scheduler, you could disable any and all of these rules. And of course, you can see how all these rules are taking action inside of your own environment. A couple of quick highlights and things to share. You can see hits for specific rules that we see over here. And then we also have the real-time dashboard. And again, if you want to look at how specific rules, maybe from a security perspective, are actually happening or triggering inside of your environment, you can do that as well. And over here, you can see we were able to trigger on a couple of rules coming into the environment. So the block on comment from way before. Again, you can go ahead and pull all this information in. You'll see the curl request that we saw over here from earlier today, blocking specific client types from earlier today as well. So a lot of stuff that we covered in just a short amount of time. And I really appreciated the interactivity. Just how many people found this useful? How many people found the discussion today around rules and specifically being able to craft these kinds of rules somewhat effective?
Yeah, and you're getting a lot of useful, very good stuff. There's one comment that somebody sent to me, and I thought was very helpful, and it helps me to go back. But the comment was similar to these use case examples provided in the link that you shared. Is there, or does Imperva have any plans to create additional examples? So, like a library of these different types of rules and templates and things like that. So I thought that was some good feedback there.
Yeah, that's great, and I would love to build that out. I know I was chatting with the PM team about putting together kind of like a quick hit list of like a lot of the rules that we've seen our customers create, a lot of rules that we've seen or that we think a lot of people would find helpful. It's very opinionated, right, when you build rules, but I think there's a good set of defaults or a good set of things like what we went through today, I think is really useful for a lot of organizations that may not be thinking about leveraging Cloud WAF just from a pure security perspective, but things like forwarding requests, things like setting up honeypots, really interesting stuff. And I think that whoever asked that question, yeah, we're going to take action there, and you'll see us push on that. So Chris, hold me accountable for that, and I'll work with the team, and we'll push beyond documentation to do something really special around rules.
The same, and I told them very similar things. There's a question there, and I think it's the last one. I think that's the last one we have time for. Is there a possibility to set up a rule to block UDP flooding?
So I believe that we handle that elsewhere in the stack. I don't think that it's through the rule interface that we have.
Okay. Can we have a webinar for sending logs to SIM and analysis?
That's a great one. Let's do that one.
Kunal's like, yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah, why not? That's a great one. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you can actually take our logs and put them into some really, really cool places. You could deploy it to Splunk. You could deploy it to Elastic. You could take our logs and send them anywhere you want. And I think a lot of organizations get a lot of power out of that. So I know I'll be on paternity leave, so I probably won't be able to help out there. But Chris, I know the right people that I can that I can. You already know them, so it's probably going to be Brian or Peter. But like either one of them would be great to walk.
I need to get Brian on another one for sure. So I'll ask him directly.
Thanks everybody for saying congrats in the chat. Really appreciate it. We haven't met in person. The cool thing about this whole thing about working from home, and now that we're leveraging a lot of this stuff, is that we're all getting to meet each other and we're all building the community. So Chris, thank you for creating this community, for pulling it all together, for doing an awesome job. And again, to all of you, really appreciate it for joining. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for the questions. And thanks for pushing us. We get to become a better company. We get to really listen to what you want. And I apologize for not being able to answer some of the questions that you have. We're going to do our best to get those things answered. So I'll work with Chris and we'll propagate all those answers back out. So again, thank you all. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. And thanks for all the questions.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.